Welcome to the show, everybody out there in internet land. I've got Kelly Turow with me today.
Hello, everyone. Excited to be here.
We're excited to have you on the show. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. I'm Kelly Turow, a talent strategy leader with deep expertise in developing programs, processes, and cultures that connect people's career potential directly to business performance across the industries of tech, telecom, manufacturing, logistics, nonprofits, and hospitality. Across my career, I've been known for supporting people, organizations in two ways: really creating the strategy and building from scratch, and then also turning around underperforming teams. So I always tell my organizations, give me a whiteboard, give me a business challenge and a team, and I'll translate executive vision for you into operational reality. And I think, over my career, I've really been passionate about empowering leaders to tap into their team's potential through leadership development programs and attracting top talent to the organization through relationship based sourcing, putting the right people in the right roles with the right skills at the right time to outperform business goals.
It's fantastic. I love your attitude. And also, I'm impressed by the breadth of experience you've got.
Thank you. It's been quite a journey over the last 15 years, and I'm just excited for what's next.
And there's so much that's coming that's, HR is always changing. It's always exciting. What got you involved in HR?
Yeah, um, helping people.
Okay.
That's really when I boil it all down, it is to help people. And so, I put myself through college serving tables at restaurants. And, in that perspective, helping people enjoy a great meal, have a great experience. And, what drew me to helping people in one of the more complex areas of their lives, their career, is how I found the people process and the areas of talent management, talent acquisition that I have deep expertise in. So, you know, I I feel like the function of HR has really evolved since then, and really it's been twofold. So the first is giving leaders a real responsibility in their
Mhm.
employees' life cycle. So HR has had to really take a step back from owning the employee life cycle for their leaders and allow the leader to build those critical relationships. And the second is with technology. And HR has, mostly been sheltered from needing to really be ahead of the curve with the newest and latest technologies than their counterparts in the business because of the relationship and the people focus of their role. But that has really shifted dramatically. And as the HR partner needs to be the business leader first, in my opinion, then HR, they really need to be embracing technology and leading out with it. So the HR leaders who are really taking it upon themselves to learn and get, dangerous with the tools, and I think about AI first, they are really going to differentiate themselves from their peers. Going back to, my journey and my story of, coming up through restaurants and, staffing and recruitment and talent management and, Fortune 50 companies, it really is boiling down to HR being a strategic partner and HR being a technologist.
That's a really interesting take. And I'm also a big believer in the HR tech stack and upskilling. It's and it's challenging. The AI front is changing almost daily. I've had to switch AI providers a couple of times to make sure I maintain an edge. And it's I find it interesting, but also essential because I've got a fair amount of experience and skills already, and I
Mhm,
don't want to leave them behind or stop developing them. But
mhm.
at the same time, there's that pressure to stay on top of the technology.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And, it's interesting because when I think about the reasons why employees feel like they aren't able to, take the training or, carve the time out, it's that the business is moving so fast and they feel like stepping out of the business for that 1 hour on a training where they feel like it's not really going to drive the impact and the value that they need to operate in their roles today, that's where I see a lot of training adoption lag or plateauing in folks' skills, as you mentioned, because they are just so focused on what's right in front of them. And
Mhm.
that really leans nicely into the work I've done in talent management because we made a really significant kind of separation and differentiator of performance management and talent management. Talent management is all about the future. It's all about your potential and the skills that you can be building and gaining to get to your next step. And we really made it clear throughout the whole organization from the top, right? Those leaders championing those, the development of the skills so that the workforce would see that, yes, it's important to perform and be a top performer in your role today, but you can't lose sight of what's next for you. And that doesn't always mean a promotion. It could
Mhm.
just mean, to your point, Bill, being great in your role today and growing where you're planted is a phrase I like to use, and growing your skill set and staying ahead of the curve, as I mentioned.
Yeah, it's essential to build that constellation of skills.
Mhm,
Especially going back to your point about one of the reasons you went into HR was to help people.
mhm,
And, the workforce now is so dependent on technology. They
mhm.
want help and answers to their questions as quickly as possible, which those two things are big changes that I've seen over the last few years, especially since the pandemic. Just adds more pressure to being in HR.
It does. And then I'll add one more thing on top of that, Bill. It's being the strategic partner.
Yes.
And that is a real fundamental shift. And I mentioned a little bit about that in terms of how I feel that HR has evolved since I was waiting tables back in my college years. And the strategic partnership is just so important. And, when I see that, how HR leaders are really directly impacting the business while not losing sight of their core responsibility, and that is of helping people and supporting the employees of the organization. They still need to balance being a strategic partner, and that includes the technology that we've been talking about. But in my experience, the HR leaders who really spend all of their time with employees and leaders, helping them navigate through the day to day, right? They're often seen by the executives and the senior leaders of their organizations as being too transactional and, not really bringing enough value to the business. But the HR leaders who really raise up to that 30,000-foot viewpoint as a strategic partner, and they only stay there, that may also not be the sweet spot, right? Because then they may become way too far away from the needs of the business. And we both have seen the HR leaders who we've said, gosh, they're just so out of touch. They don't understand the needs of the employees. They don't
Mhm.
understand what the employee does day to day. They're doing walk alongs or ride alongs or shadows because they honestly do not understand how the business operates from that frontline position. And so it's really that sweet spot and the superpower, I would say, is when the HR leader is an architect and a builder.
Mhm.
So where they can translate the executive's vision into reality, into really good people programs that help build and really execute on the programs that the business leaders need. And I'll bring in data,
Mhm.
prove the worth and the value through data and metrics of how they actually help and elevate the workforce while moving the needle on the business and meeting and really exceeding those business goals and objectives.
Really good points. And it leads me to thinking about not only who does HR serve and
Mhm.
where it sits in the broader organization, but the importance of HR to strategy. Going back to your point about how executives don't necessarily know what it's like on the front lines or in middle management, the shadowing exercises are helpful. And I can
Yeah.
think of a few personal examples where I wish that, another C level could see what I was doing during the day,
Mhm.
and my team as well, because I
Mhm.
relied heavily on my team to be effective.
Mhm.
And it's, there's always that debate between the value of the shadowing exercise and
Mhm.
the time involved for the executive who's doing the shadowing. But I think it's a source of missed opportunities.
Yeah, it could be. It could be
Yeah.
because, the executives that really need to see it for themselves
Hmm.
to really have that lived experience, that is something that's necessary. But I will say there is also a component of how the HR partner can support them in those ways. And, in building that trust, building that respect by being a strategic technology forward HR partner, driven by metrics and data storytelling, they can make a very compelling argument for the executives in terms of what are the people programs that we need to be focusing on right now. It's interesting. I brought up, data storytelling and metrics. And, there are so many metrics. There's so much data. And the question might be, what metrics are important?
Hmm.
How do you determine what to share with your executive team, what to share with your leaders to really make an impact and ensure that the initiatives and the programs and the processes and the things that you feel are vital to get done in the organization, they have to be tied back to the metrics. So, when I think about that and I think about the compelling ways that I have seen in sharing the impact of human resources, frankly, on the business and getting, and human resource leaders getting things done. It's actually not in the things that are going well. If you'd imagine it's actually, it's when things are not firing on all cylinders. And really it's some of the hidden signals that absolutely are still measurable. And it's in those hidden signals or hidden more not as out front, if you will, as maybe your headcount ratio or your motivation scores and things of that nature. It could be time to execute, right? That could
Hmm.
be a hidden signal that when, decision starts to lag, that could be a signal that, things are not going well and there needs to be a pivot or a shift. For example, all of a sudden, your meetings on your calendar are multiplying. The business leaders need to meet with HR and we need to go over this program or this project and we need a multitude of stakeholders in the conversations every single time. But really, nothing is actually getting done. And
Hmm.
it's just really indicating that leadership misalignment and perhaps a lack of trust and credibility that the leadership has with HR. So that's definitely, one, signal that I've seen that is worth really dialing into. I think about hiring quality too. Hiring quality when that begins to suffer. And, although you may be filling all of your roles, right? Those, surface metrics, you're filling all of your roles. You're doing it in your, time to fill average, right? Everything is well there. Hiring metrics are solid. But performance issues are increasing. Or you're seeing more, pips in your organization or more folks aren't, getting average or above performance scores, that could likely be an indicator that HR may be optimizing the wrong thing or perhaps focusing on the wrong people programs. So there was a quote that the chief people officer gave, and it was, when you're implementing AI in your organization, going back to our technology conversation, implementing AI, you don't actually start with the implementation of AI. You start with evaluating all of your processes and your programs, and you're eliminating the things that aren't serving the organization any longer. And then from there, once you've done the elimination process, then you're simplifying. So there's still even another step before you would get to an automation process. So after you've simplified, then it's okay. So now it's time to automate. Because if you automate on top of bad processes, they will just go faster.
Hmm.
They are not going to get any better. You'll just have terrible processes going faster. And that's what happens sometimes. But that's what hiring quality metrics can indicate, especially through performance issues and performance scores. Lastly, I would say, again, and tied back to my experience and my roles in talent management, it's internal mobility. So that's really a quiet attrition signal when promotions and lateral moves stall, or there's a drop in discretionary effort that your employees are putting in, and when your top performers are plateauing.
Hmm.
So, when leaders are shown where the business is failing and the risks of taking no action, rather than focusing on all of the things that are going well and then trying to convince the leaders of the things that need to change, that's really where you're going to get buy-in. And that's where you can make the real action on the critical areas to improve. When you've created the friction, when you've created the pain points and you've shared it directly with them, that's where you're going to be able to make change.
Great point about the friction and the pain. Was thinking about applying AI to the symptoms
Mm,
rather than identifying the high value work and trying to simplify that work.
hmm
And I've seen projects that were one offs or pilots where they were going after the symptoms
hmm
and there were results, but it didn't seem to move the needle at
hmm
all. And that just, I think it erodes the creativity and imagination that need to be put in when we apply technology
Yeah.
to HR. Um, and I don't know if it's, the view of executives who remember old school HR before the pandemic. It certainly changed a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So that, your comments just made me think a lot about strategic potential and what the role of HR is in driving organizational value and
hmm
achieving those big objectives. Can you think of any examples where HR was successful in your mind in hitting some strategic potential?
Yeah, I definitely have one right on the top of my mind. It's a really recent initiative that I really feel captured how HR leaders are, one, strategic, and two, technologists. And so this example was through a local HR leadership professional development group that I was a part of. I was actually able to lead a project team to solve a critical business challenge. And the business challenge was career mobility.
Hmm.
Broad topic, right? It could have gone in a lot of different directions. So when we thought about, what we could do and how we could solve the critical business challenge of career mobility in organizations, I had taken my own advice towards the beginning of the year, and I chose to upskill in AI. I really looked across the landscape. I did an evaluation of my own skills, sort of like an internal skills taxonomy, and thought about how that mapped to the roles that I wanted and what I was trying to go after. And I identified that although there were a number of areas within human resources that I could have pinpointed, I chose to go the route of AI. And I actually received my AI Black Belt certification. And within that certification, I learned how to build AI workflows. And with the idea of how do we solve for career mobility, I took those learnings and the knowledge gained in my certification to actually build a bespoke AI powered career mapping plan along with a leader enablement toolkit. So, that really was, I believe, an incredible and strategic initiative that gives access, gives clarity and confidence and choice to
Hmm.
anyone, right? The workflows are built so that anyone at any point in their career could pick it up and put it into an LLM, a large language model of their choice, right? ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, what have you. And it would actually present them with two experts, a career coach and a labor market expert. So if you think about what that might cost you to hire an executive coach and hire someone who has labor market expertise, or even, I think about companies like Lightcast, right? That, build reports and data sets on labor markets. Imagine how much that would cost you to
Hmm.
have that expertise at your fingertips. This is free. This is something that folks can take. They can have a very encouraging conversation with these two experts around where they should go next in their career. And so, with adding in their resume, cover letter, perhaps, any other career portfolio documents that they feel are relevant to where they've been and where they want to go. And
Hmm.
then having that guided conversation with both the career coach and the labor market expert, they're able to identify 2 to 3 top pathways of their career that they can go to. And I'll tell you, Bill, when I ran this for myself, I was surprised.
Mm.
I got a role of chief of staff. That is not something that was on my radar whatsoever, not even an option for me. And when I saw chief of staff, I said, no way. I'm not qualified for that. There's no way I could go into a role like that. But what the tool did, what the career mapping plan offered, was it offered why I was a fit for that chief of staff role and the specific experiences and the specific companies that I had been with that leaned on that particular pathway. It also did offer some gaps, right? Here are some things you may want to close up, some skills or some credentials that you may need to get in order to move seamlessly into that role. Or perhaps you're moving into this role first and then the chief of staff role, right? So it gives you a couple of different options in terms of how you bridge your experience from where you are today to where you want to go tomorrow. And then on the flip side, we knew that there's such a large interdependency between employees and their leaders in having the support in a career journey. So if an employee goes to their leader with this great, robust career mapping plan and they're ready to go, ready to have this conversation with their leader, and their leader is not equipped, not because they don't want to be helpful, not because they don't want what's best for their employee, but maybe simply because they don't have the skill set to know how to have a coaching conversation in that
Hmm.
way. Or perhaps they're time constrained. They may be under an incredibly tight deadline, or they're trying to launch a work product, and that time constraint is a reality for them. The toolkit for the leader was built so that first it could really acknowledge and bring awareness for the leader to where they are as a leadership coach, right? As a maybe as an executive coach as well. But, as a coach for their employee, like, let's level set. Let's first get your mind right over what that even means to you and what
Mhm.
it should look like. And then it goes into here are all of the templates and scripts and, even, answers to questions that may come up during the conversation that would help you through that conversation to, address what your employee is saying and bringing up to you, and then also helping them and encouraging them along their pathway. And then finally, it layers in an accountability matrix. So we all know that we are in the driver's seat of our own career, but we are not driving alone. We have passengers in our car with us, and they are there to help us navigate and help guide us to the next exit. And, so we actually built in that accountability matrix so that it takes what the employee is going to be accountable for and also what the leader is going to be accountable for. And that might look a lot of different ways, right? Sponsorship, allowing the employee to shadow a few hours a week, whatever that looks like. But it does create a really combined accountability and partnership between the employee and the leader. And Bill, all of this was done through AI in probably about, I would say, 2 to 3 hours.
Really?
So think about how long that would have taken. I mean, this would have been a multi-month process just to even get the models or the, scripts and the templates in place, and not to even mention what it would take to roll it out across the organizations. That is absolutely, and for HR to have both sides of that story of what the employee wants, what the leader sees for them, and how they're supporting the employee to get there. That is absolutely powerful, powerful information to have and puts the HR leader in an incredibly strategic point to support career mobility within their organization.
2 to 3 hours.
Yeah.
And that's time to execute. And that is powerful. And to me, it just shows, first of all, how much you want to help the people in your organization get to the next part of their journey. That's what coaching is about, at least to me. And it shows employees and teammates just how much the organization not only cares, but can bring to bear to
Mhm.
address pressing problems.
Oh, yeah.
Balancing HR strategy with operations is tough. And it's refreshing to know that there are projects that are successful in bridging that gap.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, and I would say that in thinking about so that's great, right? Everyone's super happy. The employees are feeling good. The leaders are feeling great. HR feels so powerful. How about the business? How does that
Mhm.
actually impact the business? Well, it impacts them in a lot of different ways. But one, I'll say, and through a LinkedIn learning report that I read, 94% of employees will stay with their organization if they feel like they are being developed and
Mhm.
that their careers are being taken seriously and their leadership is helping them to get there. Percent. That's almost everyone. That would be almost no turnover, right, in an organization if we really focused in and took it seriously to help folks along their career mobility. Right? So, they're going to be retained. They're going to feel motivated to do their current job today because they have something that they're looking forward to. They have, even if it's not within that organization, to be honest with you, there is a likelihood and there is, and you can call it a risk or you could just call it, an outcome. But there could be an outcome where the employee says that they want a career path that doesn't exist in that person's organization today. And so, certainly navigating that conversation, but also still supporting them and making it real for them to be able to grow wherever that might be. Because while they're while they're thinking about it, while they're growing, while they may be looking outside of the organization, it likely won't be at the pace that it might be if they were not supported, if they were
Hmm.
shut down after saying, I ideally, my role is outside the organization, right? If they're met with encouragement and support versus your skills are here and you should stay here. And, there might be growth for you in the future, but I can't guarantee anything. Like, if there's support and real honest, just transparent, open conversations there, they're gonna feel more motivated and, less motivated to leave. They'll be working at that perhaps at a slower pace. And then realistically, when we think about talent reviews, I have spent weeks conducting talent reviews across an organization. And I believe that this type of activity, because it could be iterated on to be very specialized and specific to talent reviews and talent management. And I could see the review time being cut down significantly because you already have all of what the employee wants in your hands. I know that I have seen this. I'm not sure, Bill, if you have, but I've been in talent reviews where we have been putting people on succession plans for roles. And we, as HR or business leaders, ask, "Oh, okay, is that something that they're interested in?" And the business leader says, "I don't know. I think they'd be good for it. I think they're the right next match for it." And then we go and have that conversation with the employee and they say, "Absolutely not. That is not something I'm interested in." And so there's a misalignment, and many times we tend not to follow up from those talent review conversations. And so we don't actually get that information of if they're interested or not. So then when that role comes open and they're a successor on the list, not only are they not the person that is hired, they don't even apply to the role
Hmm.
because they had no idea that they were on the list. They would have communicated that it was not something that was of interest to them. And then that would have given the leadership an opportunity to, one, align with their employee and make sure they knew exactly where their leader wanted to go, and two, identify real, honest, legitimate successors so that you would get a higher succession plan placement rate.
Wow. That's another area that I think we're in agreement on, that succession plans just don't get enough attention. Um, especially now that we're seeing large and even medium sized organizations downsize, they're drawn in by the promise of HR and not HR, sorry, AI
Mm,
to make things more efficient, but not necessarily more effective.
mhm.
It to me, it's troubling because that just leads to a brain drain in the organization as people exit, not only for different opportunities, but because they feel out of alignment with the organization. It's a struggle. And again, I think it just points out some of the things that HR needs to do in terms of not only strategy, but communicating with employees. HR is a service provider in an organization traditionally, and many executives don't recognize the value of HR in driving value for the organization.
Yeah.
What are some things that you do to make sure that HR engages and is relevant across the organization?
Yeah, we've talked a lot about, being that strategic partner and bringing forth really the kind of the hidden signals of the organization when they can work proactively to get ahead of risks and impacts to the workforce and the organization. And those things absolutely build up the trust and the credibility because that's, I think, what it comes down to. And you mentioned communication, trust, communication, credibility, like that all really feels like an ideal strategic HR person, persona or profile, if you will. If you were to ask an executive, what is your perfect HR persona? I think those would be probably the key attributes that they would mention that are necessary and needed. And I think Going back to the conversation on uncovering those hidden and maybe not on the surface metrics and signals, that's going to show the leadership that the HR teams are looking around the corners for them. They are working proactively
Hmm.
for them. And they are, really kind of helping to, block and tackle where the leaders, might have their sights and their vision on, driving the business forward and not as keenly aware or in tune of how the people programs and processes are really operating right alongside the business operations to ensure that the business is as successful as possible. And one thing that we did in our organization when we had to stand up a new talent organization post restructure, we had to really evaluate from kind of the bottom up, what are the actual people and talent processes and activities that need to happen throughout the year. Let's take this moment where we're in this transformation time, really, you know, going back to the quote from the CPO, let's eliminate the things that aren't working for us. Let's simplify the things that are, and then let's move forward and layering in, AI integration and automation. And so, that's what we did. And I because as HR partners, right, we're business leaders first. We understand all of the key milestones and moments that happen in the business across the year, so we were able to take all of the talent and people activities and align them naturally, organically to the business milestones and things that were happening in the business so that the business leaders didn't feel like we were plopping HR activities on top of their business. They really did feel a true integration. They felt that there was more value in taking a moment, right? Because every moment that the leader steps aside from the business operations is potentially revenue lost.
Hmm.
So there's a real keen, point on keeping our business folks working in the business as much as possible and stepping away to do these particular things like trainings or talent reviews or performance management and so on. Those things are very important, but they need to happen at natural milestones within in the business. And I feel like when you do that, when you layer in the activities in that way, when you drive the value of why this is important to the business and how it will achieve additional revenue, how it will help us get closer to our goals and our outcomes, and how it will simultaneously raise up the workforce. That's, I think, how you can make the case, to the business and how you can really show yourself as a strategic business partner.
Great points. Great points. Again, it's so essential for HR to not only be proactive, but to prove value. There are so many opportunities to do that you've discussed today. Um, any closing thoughts for us?
Yeah, first of all, this has been an awesome conversation, Bill. I've really enjoyed, this walk through of the world of HR and the evolution. And, I think a nice dovetail might be, so what's next for
Right.
HR, right? What's the next 3 to 5 years look like? And, I
Hmm.
think really three things are going to define HR's next chapter. The first is that HR leaders are business leaders first, right? They're
Hmm.
the ones that stay out of the people lane exclusively, and really are able to sit across from the executives, speak their language, translate vision into operational reality, and really earn that respect and that trust and that credibility. And having that is going to allow HR to move fast and execute on the right people programs that are going to move the business forward. The second would be technology fluency.
Hmm.
That's no longer an option. HR has really been a little bit sheltered, I would say, from that pressure, of being the technologist for a long time because, of our people focus. And Bill, is maybe a little controversial, but I actually kind of see that as opposite because we're people focused, we should be the ones shaping exactly how technology and AI certainly shows up in the people experience, right? In the employee's experience and life cycle. And, the HR leaders who are getting dangerous with AI, with technologies right now, they're really going to be the ones to separate themselves from their peers fast. It's going to be very evident who is out front and who is sitting on the sidelines for too long. And I think the third idea here in the next chapter is impact has to be measurable and it has to be tied to the business in very natural, organic ways. So not just, completion rates and headcount filled, but thinking about the quiet signals, bringing up the points where decision making is slowing and, when internal mobility stalls and when the top performers plateau. That's really where HR is going to be able to surface those risks before proactively to when they become crises. And that's really when HR is going to earn the real credibility and the real buy in. And I really think ultimately that's the evolution from HR as a people function to HR as the connective tissue between your people's potential and the business results.
I agree. I agree. And I wanted to thank you, Kelly, for a stimulating conversation today. At points you had me at a loss for words just because of how integrated your view of HR is and all the different pieces that you brought into the discussion. So I wanted to thank you for that. I'll be thinking about this discussion long after it's over. The viewers and listeners in the audience, I hope you will too. And we look forward to seeing you on another step on the perfect route.
Thank you, Bill. I really appreciate the time. And it was wonderful to have this conversation for you and for the audience.
You're welcome. And we'll see you on the next episode, folks.